All right. Welcome, everyone, and good morning, afternoon, or evening to you, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Emily Swenson, and it's a very early morning for me here in Chicago. And though the geography of time zones isn't on my side, I'm excited to be here with you all for this panel discussion. In my role on Esri's nonprofit and global organizations team, I lead the global nonprofit program and am working each day with nonprofits, NGOs, and community organizations that are using GIS to build sustainable, resilient, and equitable communities. The vision that the keynote speakers shared this morning is a powerful one, and one that can guide organizations and agencies of all sizes to understand, plan, and contribute to our shared future. I'm now joined by three highly regarded GIS professionals to dig deeper into that vision and discuss the ways that their organizations and agencies are acting to enhance response and resilience with GIS. So, earlier we heard Loretta Hibert-Giarde speak to the importance of robust strategic plans to support disaster preparedness. I'd like to welcome our first panelist, Laura Pradas, who brings her experience leading the World Food Programme's Geospatial Unit in the Emergency Division. Laura, do you see GIS supporting the innovative solutions required to create these plans and enable our early or anticipatory actions? And what does this look like at WFP?
Thank you for the question, Emilia. And first of all, really thanks. I'm really grateful to be here today. So I think it's a very good question because there are many ways in which GIS can support this work. As many of you know, anticipatory actions are based on, as what we call them, impact-based triggers, in where they combine forecast, natural hazards, and risk and exposure to different elements. So there is a lot of room for GIS to be able to do great things here. So before I jump to a concrete example, I would like to give you a little bit of background as to why these anticipatory actions are important. Also, before we start, just to say that there are several different agencies refer to these actions in different ways. So sometimes they are referred to as early actions and sometimes anticipatory actions. For instance, for WFP, anticipatory refers to those actions that are tied to the time window of a forecast, and the early actions come right after. But again, these are quite interchangeable. So it's quite an innovative approach that is gaining a lot of momentum in the humanitarian space. And at the same time, it's great that we're talking about this today because it really implies a fascinating application of geospatial. And as well, it's a great example of how the different agencies can work together, collaborate in support to national governments to produce better integrated responses. So why anticipatory actions? So we have seen how funding is spent on early action is far more efficient than the conventional post-disaster approaches. And although more evidence is being gathered as we speak, studies have found that taking preventive action can avoid really disaster losses and provide significant return of investment of those funds. And at the same time, it really reduces drastically the impact of disasters. So there are several initiatives. They are called, in very briefly, they can be forecast-based finances, forecast-based actions, early warning, and early actions. And they can be distinguished from other humanitarian disaster risk reduction and preparedness, as these ones particularly, they rely on forecasts to trigger funding for predetermined actions ahead of the storm, the storm or whatever, ahead of the disaster, before it actually materializes. So they're relatively new. We are a bit of exploring it, but they are really rapidly scaling up. So why GIS is important in anticipatory actions. So how we have been using it in WFP is by helping us identify in which areas we should be implementing these actions through the combination of meteorological forecasts from various sources, mostly government source, with natural hazard risk analysis. And all of this combination will help us to determine where to implement them by prioritizing what Loretta was mentioning in her talk, risk and impact. So I will now finally give you an example of how we're doing this in in WFP, which is really concrete. So in the Philippines, WFP with the Red Cross and other partners are working on the forecast-based financing. And we have developed what we call a geographical targeting model that it combines flood hazard information with population density, extreme rainfall, and poverty. So all of these factors are classified in a very simple 4-point scale from low, medium, high, very high. So for instance, the rainfall, according to how much it deviates from the average, is going to be low or medium or high. And then we combine them. So the different convergence of these indicators will lead into what we call an early warning protocol by administrative level 4. And it will be divided into four possible actions of what the agencies should do. So some areas will be classified as monitor, others as ready, others as set and go. And the ones that are go are the ones in where we are meant to implement those actions. So this model will be sending automatic emails to the relevant stakeholders that are meant to respond to the emergency before the disaster materializes, and is constantly updated. So with this information, it's possible to implement early actions, have a very good idea of where we should implement them and why, by combining all of these factors of poverty, population density, and rainfall. And it's always up to date as the storm, before the storm materializes. So this is an approach that we are expanding to other areas, and it's being really, really useful for understanding where we should implement this action. And it's also a great example of how GIS can support from analysis to action, what that was also mentioned by Jack. And I think, Emilia, I will close it here for now.
Thank you, Lara. So Lara mentioned the importance of collaboration, and this also came up several times in Jack's keynote, where he shared his goal of creating geospatial literacy beyond GIS professionals. Our next panelist, Koen Boesink from the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, brings a wealth of experience enabling others to use proven tools. Koen, what role does capacity building play in your work, and how do you see increasing geospatial literacy as essential to your program's success?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting us and the office to present at this exciting event. I'm working with UNOSA, where I'm the head of the Vienna office for the platform for space-based information for disaster management and emergency response, which is abbreviated as UN Spider. So in our program of UN Spider, we use GIS and remote sensing solutions that have proven to be useful for the disaster management community. So what we want to do has to be and serve the end users, and so that the end users are prepared to use any tools and data and products that fit their needs to act on time. So from our perspective, this requires a long-standing relationship. It's not only just bringing in the map. We prepare disaster managers and policymakers to know what their needs are, but also to improve what we call geospatial literacy is. So this has been, for example, successfully applied in working with disaster managers in Myanmar, which is unfortunately now facing some challenges. But what we did in some years' time was setting up first a technical assessment of the capacities in the country to see what the strengths and challenges are for the different agencies that we could work with. So we had a set of stakeholders, so the disaster managers, but also other line ministries and universities. And they were all brought together to discuss where each one of them could contribute to the specific disasters that are facing the countries. So then following this, the conclusion was that there was a remote sensing unit needed that was specifically dedicated to this purpose, but with inputs from the different stakeholders. So there were some trainings done with international trainers as well that were brought in, and there were links set up with international providers that provide data in case of emergencies, like satellite images. And even a start was made to set up a national spatial data infrastructure. So in this way, we were able to set up a very dedicated collaborative effort to serve the disaster management in the country. So in the process, all institutions became aware of what the needs are and what they could also expect and contribute. So this was a very successful example of how we could actually bring geospatial literacy, but also make a collaborative effort to what is needed in geospatial tasks for disaster management. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kuan. Great examples. Our final panelist is Ravi Shankar from the World Health Organization. Ravi is an esteemed technical officer at the WHO who leads the agency's recently established GIS Center for Health. Earlier, we heard Dr. Tedros' remarks on WHO's response to multiple health crises over the past several years and the importance of having good data. Ravi, what are some of the lessons that you've learned over these years from a geospatial perspective? And how do you think GIS will play a role in the transformation agenda that Dr. Tedros brought forth?
Thank you, Emily. Against the background of the COVID-19 outbreak, which has more than ever demonstrated that boundaries between the countries are artificial to the natural world. And on this momentous occasion to bring all the GIS colleagues together, I thank UNISAT and Esri, and also on behalf of the World Health Organization, I'd like to welcome you all for this conference. For long years, I worked in polio. More than 12 years, I worked in polio eradication initiative in WHO. And I supported many health emergencies, right from COVID back to Zika to Ebola to Haiti, many emergencies I supported. But the lessons learned from them is actually helping us to formulate the objective of the new GIS Center. So this GIS Center will help all other programs, including polio and other efforts. So the first objective of the center is to build and strengthen partnership and collaboration between UN agencies, development partners, and to better serve the member states. So this iterates that we are not alone, and also that we don't want to invent a wheel again. It is already out there. Our role should be more to bring the efforts which are done outside to the benefit of the member states. That's the first lesson we learned from the past crisis. The second one is we wanted to build a culture of GIS within WHO and a community of practice within WHO and beyond it. This is very important because we wanted to mainstream GIS, and otherwise we'll be always firefighters. This is because we'll be never successful in just firefighting the crisis if we don't have the culture which is built into the system in advance so that these techniques and technologies can be used during the crisis. I personally feel that WHO invests a lot during the crisis, but on the mainstream, I think this is an opportunity for us to bring that during the transformation to include the GIS into the main workflow. The third lesson is back to basics. To me, every crisis is an opportunity to build better of the basics. Let me give you an example. When we supported the Ebola crisis in 2016, there were two things which were asked from us. Can you let us know which is the best location to put the Ebola treatment centers and which is the best location to put the labs, so that by a drive time of 12 hours or so that the samples can come from the remote place to the nearest lab. So many years passed, 4-5 years passed. Now for the COVID response. We are supporting the COVID vaccination planning along with UNICEF and other core partners like World Bank, Gavi, Global Fund, and BMGF. The question which is put in front of us is, are these vaccination centers in the right location? Are they equitably distributed so that it is at the reach of the last mile? So it is exactly the same questions which are repeating. If we have done well with answering the question during Ebola, it would have been easier for us to do it now. So the point here is, it always comes back to the basics of tools and data sets. Thank you. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Rafi. Speaking of tools and data sets. In his keynote, Jack conveyed the importance of data-driven decision-making. He used the phrase that I quite like, understanding precedes action. I'd like to hear from each of you, what does that phrase mean to you? Could you share an example of how your programs have relied on data and analysis to make informed decisions? Lara, let's go over to you first.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, so another very good question. So I think considering my background in the emergency division, I would like to provide a very operational hands-on example. That is what we called in WSP the 72 hours assessment. So it's an analysis that we do in the event of an emergency for planning where we're going to locate the emergency relief. So this started because in the past WSP emergency assessments we're not providing, not all the time, but very often, information quickly enough for responding to the needs of in sudden onset disaster, and providing that information that we really quickly need for getting the immediate relief activities. So this approach aims to bring information, geospatial, but not only, very quickly, to have a good enough snapshot to fill that initial information gap in the first 3 days after a disaster strikes. And this based on the most recent available information that we can find before, and then with also secondary data post-disaster. So it's composed of three main phases, and it's a very nice example you will see of how we combining data information. It can really lead very quickly to very informed decisions that on the ground. So the first phase is the most important phase, is the data preparedness. So this is also linked to what Koen was saying before. So we engage with the country offices and the national institutions with in order to bring all together all the data that we will need in the event of a disaster. So we make a checklist of the data that will be required. We prepare the country office until we have a fully operational system that will allow us to store and share all the country data and have it ready to map. We normally use spatial data infrastructures. And this data is from all sorts of mostly spatial on demographics, poverty, food security, nutrition, natural hazards, risk areas, all of this. Once we have this nice ready to map SDI with everything we need there, we start the phase number 2, which is the initial assessment. That is a very simple sort of geographical targeting in where we use all of the data to come up what we call priority areas of intervention. So within the 72 hours of a disaster, we must have the initial report that will answer two main questions. The first one, which are the priority areas for assistance and how many people need assistance? And these two are key for guiding the response and are all based on data initially. So to be able to answer these questions, we use the base available information about the disaster. We call it geographical impact of the disaster. So for instance, for tropical storms will be the wind buffers and also the rainfall. So we use both. Normally we use ECMWF for the rainfall and the GDAX for the wind buffers. For the earthquakes, we use the magnitude, the epicenters, and the shake maps from USGS. And for the flooding, we use all sorts of satellite imagery. So once we have this, we do estimations of the population affected or potentially possibly affected, and then try to come up with finer targeting through doing a breakdown of vulnerability within these areas. So once we have this, that is answers very quickly to these two questions, thanks to the data that we have consolidated in phase 1, we start the field verification. So there is people in the field that will be always updating this report as new data comes in. So we continue to refine those assumptions and adjust day to day this estimated number of people in need and priority areas. So I think Emily is a great example of how data comes together to really take informed decisions in the ground that come down at the end to people. And I'll leave it here for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lara. That is a great example. Kuan, understanding precedes action. What does this mean to you?
Yeah, a bit elaborating on what Lara already mentioned, because we are a bit in the same area of disaster management. I would like to emphasize the role of geospatial models here. So what Lara mentions is the use of meteorological data and other GIS layers, for example, also detailed digital elevation model, land use maps, all that can be extracted from satellite imagery, then goes into a model, a geospatial model, as we all know them, that are well done in the GIS. So by doing that, we have the advantage that we can also play with scenarios, and that is, I think, a very important issue nowadays, that we work with scenarios on the climate change. So we have the facts from what is going to be a climate in the future, which we can insert in our modeling, and then come to the understanding, okay, what do we have to do to prevent any potential disasters? And in this context, I would like to mention the monitoring of the essential climate variables that are defined by the different UN organizations, and where remote sensing and GIS play a key role to see where is going to happen what, and how can we adapt to the new situation. So what kind of crops do we have to grow in certain places to adapt to the new agroecological conditions? So so besides preparing for having new crops, for possible droughts, floods, but also like being prepared for more forest fires. So I think scientists and UN play a big role here to bring this understanding to policymakers, but also to the end users like farmers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuan. And Ravi, anything to add?
Yeah, quickly, briefly talking about that. WHO, together with you guys, our partners, we have one question in mind. How can we work together to achieve timely and informed decision to save lives? So to do this, the data is in our centerpiece for us. Instead of assuming that these are the tools and technology country needs, we are actually listening to them. So this is exactly what understanding precedes action. That's how I see it. So first to know what is their need, then to introduce the tools which we have, rather than rushing there, hey, I'm here, I have these tools, go ahead and use this. We are thinking about the reverse approach here, exactly listening to the country, understanding their needs, then take the step to introduce us, or step back and say, hey, you're already good with this, you don't actually need our intervention. Even to make that decision, I think is important at this stage. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Ravi. So as we've heard, this is the 10-year anniversary for the GIS, or Sustainable World Conference. In that time, there's been great advancement in geospatial technology. It also seems that the challenges facing our world are ever growing. I'd like to hear from you for just a moment. I'd like you to imagine for just a moment where we might be 10 years from now as a global community, and how might GIS help us to achieve a brighter future? What do you all think?
Might be I start briefly and others can join. I think I've attended 9 out of 10 conferences this month, so except the one which happened in New York. I think we'll have cloud computing at the reach of the local communities. I think there'll be more participation from the local communities, and we will see a bottom-up approach in the work we are doing. And there'll be more of NGOs and volunteers who is going to make a difference in the near future. Thank you.
Lara, any thoughts from you?
Sure, I'm gonna say something that may sound a bit basic, but sometimes simple things are best. So my dream, and it will resonate with many of my colleagues and people listening to us, is that we have one unique reference, always up-to-date data on administrative boundaries that we can all use, and we are happy about it. Sometimes this is more important than high-resolution imagery. So this is accessible, always up-to-date. This is going to be one of my dreams. And then also, I hope that there will be better access to data and more quality across all sectors, and it's more accessible to everyone. as well as interoperable spatial data infrastructures would be great. So we work more easily towards data integrations, and evidence-based decisions as the one that we were all talking today become a norm and not an exception. So these links are, again, with increased geospatial literacy, and that more people are able to really interpret geospatial data. So those would be my key points for 10 years from now, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. And Kuan, anything that you imagine 10 years from now?
Yeah, I just to add, of course, there are very good examples that Lara and Ravi are mentioning. So, but and access to the cloud is not given for everybody. So, in a lot of developing countries, the access to internet is still problematic. So, I see that as a real, a dream, or that will happen. That for example, through satellite-based internet, that there's access to the data, and that people can actually work with GIS seemingly, and through streaming, and access the latest satellite images that are more and more available. So that is what I see as from now and 10 years, and I hope that will be the case. And in addition, also, I hope that government agencies are making their data available, so that more data becomes open data and not keeping it for themselves. That I also hope that it will happen.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I think that's a positive note for us to end this inspirational plenary morning. But before we head into the rest of the conference, I'd love to quickly hear from each of you. What technical workshops and community lightning talks are you looking forward to the most over the next 2 days? Ravi?
Yes, this is an interesting thing. Every conference, it's a learning curve for us, right? There's a lot of things for us to learn and interact and network. I'm looking forward for Arcade, JavaScript, and things for better labeling and visualization. I think that is the one thing we are very much interested. And the other one is on the story maps. We like to see what are the new things which are coming in story map. We are using story map to a great extent, and we like to see the latest advancement in that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Happy learning to you. And Lara, what are you looking forward to?
Thank you, Emily. So my top session is, I believe it's right after this one, and I hope everyone can join, which is informing sustainable decisions with spatial and temporal analysis. I think this is a great example of how GIS is much more than mapping. I'm also looking forward to responding to sudden onset complex emergencies, because also there's a colleague from WFP and it's very relevant to us. The latest on GeoAI tomorrow with Romy, and then community lighting talks on building resilience. But I mean, all of it is extremely interesting. This would be like my top 4. Thank you, Emily, and hope everyone enjoyed it.
Thank you, Lara. And Kuan, what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, also some that Lara mentioned. I was also looking at the one on temporal analysis, because it adds an extra dimension to our spatial analysis, and it's also very exciting what is now possible with the ever more increasing time series that we have on data. So that I want to see what the applications are, but also very much looking forward to the community lightning talks to hear actually what the users are doing in the in different areas. Yeah.
Thank you, Kuan. With that, I would like to thank the panelists for sharing their thoughts and insight with us this morning, and the dedication that they've made to creating a more sustainable and resilient world using GIS. So thank you. And thank you to the audience for joining us for this conversation. A recording will be available for you to revisit after the conference. So with that, enjoy the rest of the conference and be well until we can gather in person again. Thank you.